you. This talk is entitled Moving Forward from Here. So a lot of things have been happening in America and the world, and a lot of serious things. People know serious things are happening in the world, and a lot of people don't know what to do. It's a big question, even with God's people. What's coming next, and how are we going to make it through? How are we going to deal with the things that are coming? And so I'd like to talk about that and share some experiences that I've had that have really encouraged my faith, and hopefully they can be an encouragement to others as well. So to begin with, I'd like to start with a word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we thank you so much for the privilege to gather together, and we pray that you'll encourage and strengthen our faith. Please help us and guide us and keep us safe as we're traversing the ground ahead of us. We know that you know everything that's coming, and we know that you have 1,000 ways to provide for us of which we know nothing. And we pray that you'll continue to take care of us and be with us. And I pray that the testimonies, the things that you've done for me that have really encouraged my faith can also be a blessing to others. And I pray that you'll use the things I say to bless those that hear, and please let it be your words heard and not mine. We thank you. We pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, some of you are familiar with the narrow way dream. It's a very interesting dream. I don't have time to go through it all, but it's very much like what we're experiencing right now. We're traveling this pathway. We're getting close to the end of the pathway, and the cords are increasing. Our faith needs to be increasing. There's one particular part I want to focus on, and it's this paragraph right here. And it says, "We then thought of those who had not accustomed themselves to privations and hardships. Where were such now? They were not in the company. At every change, some were left behind, and those only remained who had accustomed themselves to endure hardships. The privations of the way only made these more eager to press on to the end." So I want to be one of those who presses on to the end. And we want to be willing to endure hardship and privation if necessary. Sometimes that's things we have to go through in this life. And a lot of people are experiencing more and more hardships and privations right now. People are losing jobs. There's a lot of things happening. And we need to develop faith in the dream. Those cords, those green cords, they kept growing bigger and bigger as they went along. That was a symbol for their faith growing bigger and bigger, and God's provision for them getting greater and greater. So this is I'm going to be talking about faith in particular. And here's another quote. "Season of distress and anguish before us will require a faith that can endure weariness, delay, and hunger. A faith that will not faint though severely tried. The period of probation is granted to all to prepare for that time." So this is right now is our preparation time, and a lot of us are experiencing things like weariness, delay, hunger. Maybe not hunger yet. We may be facing that in the future. We may be facing the possibility of that if we've lost jobs or something. So this here says, "We should now acquaint ourselves with God by proving his promises." So that's what we need to be doing right now. And the tough times are starting to come on us, and worse times are coming. People are losing their jobs. And the question for a lot of people is, right now, what do we do now? The encouraging thing is that there's a lot more people that have more time to work for God now. In the past, people were kept from doing a lot by their jobs. They had to work 8 hours a day, and then you don't have much time left to do ministry after you've been working 8 hours a day for an employer. But now a lot of people, they've lost their jobs at a regular employer, and now they have time to do ministry work. And so I want to encourage people, that's part of the goal of this talk, is to encourage you that if God's calling you to do full-time ministry now, he will take care of you, and he can be your employer. I want to start back. I'd taken training at Uchee Pines Institute in Alabama. I was taking their lifestyle educator training course, which trains in medical missionary work and evangelism work, combining it like Christ did in his ministry. And as I was going through the training, I was nearing the end of the training, and I was thinking about, well, what am I going to do after I finish this training? I want to do full-time ministry, and like, what kind of ministry am I going to do? How am I going to be supported while I do this ministry? And I ran across the stories of George Mueller, and I started hearing the stories of David Gates, and the amazing stories of how they just went forward with ministry work, whatever they felt like God was calling them to do, and God provided for it all. And I thought that's really amazing to let God provide for you instead of depending on humans, depending on a ministry to back you up. Just going out and doing whatever God gives you to do and letting Him take care of the funding for it. So that was a really amazing concept to me. And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about starting a ministry and living that way. Like, I heard the stories of George Mueller and David Gates, how God provided thousands and millions of dollars for them to do all kinds of ministry work in huge, like David Gates is all over the world. George Mueller, he was taking care of thousands of orphans. So I thought this is really incredible. And I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about starting a ministry this way, but it was kind of scary to me. It's like, well, is this really possible? I'm hearing stories of people that lived this way and they did this, but is this really possible? Does this really work? Because logically, that's not how you do a ministry. That's not how most ministries work. And so I was really thinking about that, and I was feeling like, does God really do this? Is this really possible to do this? And at church, there was somebody that was preaching a sermon about Peter walking on the water, and it wasn't on the topic I was thinking about, but in my mind, I started thinking about Peter walking on water, and that was, to me, that was kind of like a symbol of what I was thinking about doing ministry by faith with no funding from any humans, an assured funding from a human source. You're not supposed to be able to do things that way. That's not the normal way to do things. And I felt like that's like Peter walking on water. You can't walk on water normally. That's impossible. But when Jesus called him to do it, he could do it. Anything is possible if Jesus calls you to do it. And so I was asking God, is it really possible to walk on water? Referring to this, doing this kind of ministry. And I was asking him that question as I was walking through the library. I asked him the question, is it really possible to walk on water? And the moment I asked him that question, I was walking by the bookcase, and I looked over, and there was a book on the shelf I'd never seen before. The title was, Of Course You Can Walk on Water. That just blew me away. I'd never had such an immediate and direct answer to a question I asked God. And I took that as my assurance that, yes, this is possible. God does want me to do this. It was like when Peter asked Jesus, he said, if it's really you, tell me to come to you on the water. And Jesus said, come. And I felt like that's what Jesus was doing. He was saying, yes, come. And so I started doing that kind of ministry, just going out and doing just whatever God put before me, not worrying about where the funding was going to come from, not stopping work because it wasn't in my hands yet. And so I want to share some stories. I don't have time. I could share miracle stories for hours of all the things God's done, and I don't have time for all that, but I just want to go over kind of a summary of the ways that God's taken care of us over the years. And a lot of people are worried about a roof over your heads. That's kind of one of the first things. Where are you going to live? How are you going to have a house? Houses cost money. It costs money to rent. And so I counted up, over the last 13 years that I've been doing ministry, I counted up how many houses I've lived in. It was about 15 different houses, and almost all of them were rent-free. Many of them had all utilities paid. It was really amazing. God worked out. There's a different situation with each one. Usually it wasn't the same thing twice, but God just worked it out. One house situation after another. He provided 15 different places to live in 13 years, really nice places in 3 different countries. And it was just at the time that they were needed. He usually provided just in a miraculous way, right when I needed a new house to live in a new location, he would provide it. And here are some recent examples. We built a cabin in North Dakota, just a small little cabin, and we lived in that for a number of years. And then the land that it was sitting on, that it was built on, didn't belong to us. And so the owner came to us and said he wanted to sell the property in order to get out of debt. So we had to leave the cabin. We had to move out. And just when we were getting ready to move out, we didn't know where we were going. somebody asked us to come house sit in Arkansas. Somebody we didn't even know. She didn't know us, but she just happened to get on Facebook, which she didn't usually do. And she just happened to get on at the right time to see a post that my wife had put up, asking if anybody had suggestions of where we could go, or a good place that we wouldn't be needed. And this lady happened to get on at the right time to see that and asked us to come take care of her house for her. And it was just like the timing was just miraculous, just incredible timing for us, for her. She had to leave like just a few days after we got there. She'd been looking for somebody for a long time, haven't found anybody. And then we arrived just before she had to leave to go where she was needed. And then when the time came, when that housing situation was finished, we needed another place to live after that. And just as things were kind of wrapping up there, God provided us an RV. Some friends of ours just asked us one day, so they said, we have an RV we'd like to give you. Do you want it? And it was a really nice, like 33-foot long RV, really nice condition inside. So we've lived in that for several summers now. And we brought that back to North Dakota. And then the time came, RVs aren't good for winter living, obviously, and the north gets pretty cold in the wintertime. And so we needed a place that we could live in the wintertime. We had planned to go south with the RV, but then some friends in North Dakota asked us to house sit their house for them. And so we decided to do that, and that was a really good situation. It really worked well for us. And then after that, we needed another place to go. And so I'm going to be telling the story of that a little bit later. I want to get more into detail on that, so I'll leave that for a little bit later. Another thing that people need is vehicles. So like, you need to drive, you need gas, all these different things. A vehicle costs a lot of money. Next to your house, probably your vehicle may be the next most expensive. And over 13 years of doing ministry, God's provided me with 4 different vehicles for free. 2 of them were close to being brand new. We're still driving one of them now. Actually, I think it was actually 5 vehicles. He's provided me even more vehicles before I started doing ministry, as an encouragement to tell me he could provide for me when I started doing ministry. I won't go into the stories of those, but at least during the last 13 years, he gave me 4 or 5 different vehicles. And the next thing you need is equipment. Like, for doing ministry, like for us especially, our ministry is like cutting edge technology type ministry. We need really expensive equipment to do this ministry with. And like at first I didn't know how God was going to provide that, because it's a lot of money for just one set of equipment, and we needed more than just one. And so that's something that, for us at least, the kind of equipment we needed was pretty expensive. And so over the last like 5 years that we've been doing this kind of ministry, God's provided about $16,000 worth of equipment. And that's just amazing. Like, starting out, I never would have imagined he was going to provide that much equipment in only like the 5 years that we've been doing this virtual reality ministry. And so he can provide whatever you need. It's like every time we need a new set of equipment, he provides it. We go through stuff fast because we have thousands of people using this equipment like hour after hour after hour, and so it wears out pretty fast. And so every few years we need a new set of equipment, and it's expensive, but every time we need it, God provides it. And it's just been really incredible. Either he provides the money or somebody actually gives us equipment. I'd like to tell a lot more stories about all that, but I'll have to save those for another time. So another thing is food and clothing. Another big need, especially if you have a family, if you're married, you got to provide for your family. You got to provide food and clothing and stuff like that, as well as the house and the car. And so over the years that I've been doing ministry, I've been doing it for like more than 13 years now. I've always had enough food. It's just been really incredible. When I was first starting out, a lot of times I didn't know where my next meal was going to come from. And God would provide over and over and over. He'd provide what I needed. I always had enough. There was times when like I was totally out of money, totally out of food. I didn't know what I was gonna do, because I was out in the middle of nowhere doing ministry. Nobody hardly knew I was out there doing ministry. It wasn't like I had a bunch of supporters, but God always provided. Money was deposited right when I needed it at the very last minute. Seems like God usually waits till the last minute. There were times like friends from like a half hour away that didn't even know that I was in need of anything. They would just suddenly drive up with a truckload of food right when I needed it. And they didn't know. They'd just gone to town and they were impressed to buy food for me too. And I hadn't talked to them. They had no way of knowing that I needed it right then. But I was like on my last meal and I needed it right then. Even strangers would bring me food. People I didn't even know would come up to my house and say, I brought you food. And they had heard about me from some friend of theirs who was a friend of mine who I had been reaching out to and doing ministry to. And there was times when food would appear in containers that I was sure had been empty. And I don't know if God just miraculously made food appear, but I was sure those containers were empty. And I was sifting through the cupboards because I'd used up all the food I had in the house. And here was containers full of food again. And it was just amazing how God provides. He would just different things, always something different he was providing. And there was times when old food that I was about to throw away became fresh again. There was a bag of steel cut oats, I think it was, that my mom had given me to feed to the dog because it was starting to turn rancid. You could smell it. It was kind of smelling bad. So I was going to feed it to the dog, and I never did. And it just got like buried in a box somewhere. And every time I'd go near that box, I could smell it. For some reason, I didn't get rid of it. And one day I was out of food, and I was sifting through everything, and I found that, and I smelled it, and it didn't smell anymore. And I thought, oh, that's kind of weird, because it was so bad before I couldn't even like get near the box without smelling it. And so I opened up the bag, and it didn't smell, and I cooked it, and it still didn't smell. And I tasted it, and it tasted perfectly fine, like it was brand new. So that was one of the times when God made old food suddenly become fresh again. He can do whatever miracles he has to do. Usually he works through people. Sometimes when, for whatever reason, if there's no people available or just to encourage our faith, he sometimes just does a total miracle, makes money appear where it shouldn't have been, makes food appear where it wasn't before. So during the first 6 years that I started doing ministry, it was kind of like my training time, I think. And funds were really tight. I barely had enough food to live on. Like God just supplied day to day, week to week, just barely enough to get me through, because he was training me. I was needing to strengthen my faith a lot. I needed a lot of these experiences because I would have a hard time remembering how he had provided in the past, and I'd start worrying again. When I'd be out of money, I'd be out of food, I had bills to pay, and I'd start to worry again. And so he had to keep training me. He had to keep providing over and over, week by week, month by month, taking care of me and providing me and doing miracles for me to give me the stuff that I needed. And during this whole time, there was only one time when I actually ran out of food. Well, I hadn't actually run out yet, but I fasted for one day because the food was almost gone. And so there was only one time that I actually fasted for a day. Other than that, I had food to eat all the time, and usually just barely on time. Like I'd be on my last meal, and then I'd get an email saying somebody had said they'd put money in my bank account or something like that. And it was just almost always at the last minute, but he always came through. And I realized I could tell for sure that there's somebody really big out there who knows exactly how much food I have in my cupboard, exactly how much money I have in my bank account, how much gas I have in my car, and he cares about me. He's taking care of me. He knows when I'm running out. He's big enough to, even though nobody knows when I need things, I'm not telling anybody when I need things. I'm not telling them that I'm running out of food. I'm just keeping it to myself, and God impresses somebody hundreds of miles away to send money, put money in my account, or impresses somebody to drive up with food right when I need it. He's big enough to do all that. And so I learned that by experience during those first 6 years. And my bills always got paid. There was one time when I didn't have enough money and I was a little bit late on a bill. And when the receipt arrived, or whatever paperwork it was after I'd paid it, there was no sign that they knew that it had been late. It was like God kept the computers from knowing that I had been late on paying my bill. And so even the times when I felt like, well, God let me down. I didn't have money to pay my bill in time. Well, it was a little bit later then he did supply the money and did a miracle so that the computers wouldn't even know it had been late. So he can do whatever he has to do. So yeah, usually God would supply just at the very last minute. And another interesting thing that I learned is that if I started to trust in a human source, like if somebody was sending money several months in a row, and I started to kind of rely on that and think, okay, I can trust in this human to send money again this month, suddenly they'd stop. Every time I started trusting in a human source, suddenly it would dry up and it'd disappear and they'd stop sending money or whatever. And then it would come from some other source instead. And so I learned I can't trust in any human source. God is the one supplying it. And if I trust in any of these sources, then they're probably going to dry up. So that's something I learned, that everything comes from God, even if he's using people to send it. It's coming from him. And so my first 6 years of ministry was kind of like the training time. And then since that time, it's been more like now I'm in the work experience phase where God's providing usually ahead of time. I don't usually have to get right down to the last minute anymore. We have a lot more money to work with because we have a lot bigger fields of labor to go into. And so it's been easier in a way. I don't know if sometimes we still get to a tight spot and I still worry a little bit. So I'm not sure if I've totally learned my lessons of faith, but I think I learned a lot, at least. I learned to trust him to a great degree. And so now it's like he provides more easily. Like I don't have to worry as much about where the money's come from. I just do whatever I need to do, and I know the money's going to be there. And so I don't spend as much time worrying anymore. And typically we have a lot more to work with. We don't have to be as tight, as close to running out of money as it used to be. So I'm just saying that because if you start ministry, you may go through different phases. He may not work with you just the same way he did with me, but he'll work with you however he sees is best. And every ministry needs donations to keep going. That's how God funds his work, is through impressing people to send donations. And I learned that donations would always come right when they were needed. And for the amount that they were needed for. Like if we get more donations, like if a lot more suddenly comes in, we can expect that there's probably going to be a big need coming up too, because it seems like God makes more come in if more is going to be needed, or less come in if less is going to be needed. And so there again, we can tell there's a really big being out there who's got everything planned out. He knows what's coming in the future, and he's providing for us in proportion to what we're going to need. And there's times when money comes from people I don't even know. There's times when, God provides from sources, like large provisions from sources that I don't even know the person, and somehow they found out about what we were doing. And sometimes it's from people I haven't talked to for years. Somehow they find out that I'm doing ministry or something. God impresses them somehow, and they send large donations sometimes. And I'm just kind of surprised, like, wow, that's amazing. I didn't expect that. Like, you'd expect it from people that are kind of following your ministry on a regular basis, but it's been really amazing. And just a few statistics for our India ministry. We're supporting pastors and Bible workers in doing evangelism in the villages. And we send over there about $20,000 a year for the pastors and Bible workers. And like, these numbers are mind-blowing to me when I actually figure out how much it is per year. If starting out, I never would have dreamed that this would be happening. Like, where am I going to get $20,000 to send to India to support work over there? That's impossible. I don't have any access to any sources like that. But God can do it. He can impress people. We don't know a lot of times where it's going to come from. God impresses this person and that person, and it just ends up all being there at the time we need it. And the satellite broadcasting on the satellite, we're broadcasting across the whole eastern hemisphere of the world in Hindi and Telugu, and that costs about $10,000 a year. And there again, that's really cheap for satellite broadcasting, but that's a lot of money for us. It's my parents are the ones kind of heading up the India ministry, and my wife and I work with it as well. And between the two of us, we're just ordinary people. We have a ministry. My dad is just a carpenter. He doesn't make a lot of money. We don't have a lot of money. Where is this all going to come from? But God's the head of the work, and He can provide for it from wherever it's needed. So we've learned we don't have to worry about it. He can take care of whatever we need at just the right time when it's needed. And so yeah, this satellite that we're broadcasting on reaches the entire eastern hemisphere of the world, and it's potentially downlinked by about 123 cable channels. They receive the satellite signal and then they rebroadcast it through their cable out to all their subscribers on their cable channels. So that's in addition to whoever's receiving it on their satellite dishes. In addition to that, there's also the cable companies that are broadcasting it. And I found out that just one of those cable companies, the biggest, one of the largest ones, has a subscriber base of 100 million people. That's just mind-blowing to me. That's like a third of the United States population over there in India. That many people that potentially have access to our programming on the satellite coming through their cable television. So that's just mind-blowing. That's just a little bit of the statistics on how much God has to provide every year to keep the ministries going. And that's only the India ministry. That's not our other ministry. We are using the virtual reality to do evangelism at fairs and things like that. And that costs a lot of money too. We have to buy, like, at each fair we give away about 500 to 700 books. Each of those books costs like maybe $1 or $2, somewhere in there. So we're looking at a lot of money from that, and then we have to pay for going to each fair. We have to pay our travel expenses and our food expenses and all these different things, and God provides for all of it. So whatever we need, He can provide. So traveling is another thing that costs a lot, and when you're doing ministry, you need to travel. And for a lot of ministries, at least some you don't have to, but for ours, we have to travel quite a lot. So He's provided all the travel expenses for me. I've lived in 3 different countries. He's provided for all the travel expenses for that. We've traveled since my wife and I started doing ministry, the virtual reality ministry, since we got married. We've traveled through at least about 40 of the 50 states in about 5 years. And God has, part of our ministry has to do with creation versus evolution and giving the reasons, the scientific evidences for our faith in the Bible, the authenticity of the record of the flood and the creation of the world. And so part of our ministry has to do with that. That's kind of one of the door openers that we use to interest people in the Bible and the books that we have. So as part of that, God has opened the way for us to travel to 26 different national parks and famous geological places for doing virtual reality photography and documenting the evidences of the flood and the fossils, dinosaur bones, all kinds of stuff like that. Basically gathering evidence for the authenticity of the Bible record of the flood. And God's also opened the way for us to visit famous museums all across the country. We've been to a lot of the most famous museums, Christian-based creation science museums, as well as secular museums. It's just amazing how God provides for all that. Like, a lot of people, they might visit a few of these places during their lifetime when they go on vacations, but God has worked it out so that our travels to do ministry with the virtual reality have taken us past a lot of these national parks and stuff. And so we got a pass and we go into these different places to gather the evidence to share with people, just because it's on our route. It's already like our route is just perfect to go travel to these places. So it's really amazing how God provides for all the travel. Like, we travel in the summer, we travel like all across the whole United States. And God provides all the expenses, all the costs for that. So I've been doing full-time ministry for about 13 years now. My wife and I, since we got married, we've been doing it for about 5 years together. And so I learned to trust God to be my employer and provide what I need. When you're working for an employer, you expect that your employer is going to provide what you need for doing the work that he's assigned you to do. You expect a lot of times the employer will give you like the company credit card, or he'll provide for you to rent vehicles, or he'll provide for your food. Whatever you need to do while you're on the mission that he's assigned you to, he'll provide for that. And God is the same way. He's always providing for the mission work, whatever we need to do, he's providing for that to get done. And it's really amazing experiencing that. It's a very out of the ordinary thing to do, and it's quite an adventure. It's an adventure with God. You're accomplishing something that has long-term, everlasting results. You're doing something worthwhile, like that has eternal results. You're not just working at some 8-hour-a-day job that provides for your family, but doesn't really accomplish that much in the world, per se. I mean, it's good to whatever work you have to do that faithfully, but when you're doing ministry work, everything you do has eternal results. Like you're going to see thousands of souls saved in God's kingdom potentially because of the work that you're doing. And so it's a really wonderful thing to be doing. It feels so fulfilling. I just love doing ministry work, and I wouldn't want to do anything else. And I want to especially say to young people, a lot of young people, when they're first getting started, like I was, first getting started in life, and they're considering, well, what should I do with my life? They may think that working for God is boring. Well, they think that, well, if I get a job doing something else, that's going to be more exciting and it's going to be more fulfilling. And it may seem like working for God's going to be boring. And if you work for God, will you ever get to live out your dreams? A lot of young people, they have a lot of dreams of what they'd like to do in life. They'd like to travel and see the world and different things like that. And I just want to tell young people, working for God is an adventure. You get to do amazing things that you never would get to do if you were just doing a normal life, the more normal American lifestyle, working at an 8-hour-a-day job for just an ordinary employer. You get to do things working for God that you'd never get to do otherwise. When I was a young person and I decided to work for God, I thought maybe I was going to be giving up my dreams. I wanted to travel. I wanted to go overseas and different things like that. And like I said, I've been to 3 different countries. I've lived in 3 different countries doing mission work. I've traveled to other places for short-term mission work. And for me in particular, one of my childhood dreams was scuba diving. I loved scuba diving. Jacques Cousteau was one of my heroes because he's the one that invented the aqua lung. I was just enthralled with the ocean and scuba diving, and I lived about in the middle of the United States where the ocean was thousands of miles away in both directions. And so, like, thinking about doing ministry, it's like, well, maybe that's giving up my dreams. I probably never get to see the beautiful oceans and tropical islands and go scuba diving and stuff like that. If you want to do that, normally you have to get a really good paying job, and then you have to use the money that you earn to do that during your vacation time. So you can only do it for like a couple weeks or something. And so I went into full-time ministry, and God did amazing things, and he even fulfilled my childhood dreams. One of the places that I went to, did mission work for a while, was the Fiji Islands. So I got to be on this tropical island, which was kind of a childhood dream. I got to go, like, the scuba diving was just a few feet from my house. I could walk out the door of my house and walk down to the beach, and it was a beautiful bay. There was an island within sight we could go to by boat that was just beautiful coral reefs. You could go snorkeling there. I could go snorkeling anytime I wanted to. I didn't have much time to actually do that because I was so busy doing mission work, which was more important anyway. But I could if I wanted to. I could just walk down to the beach and go snorkeling anytime I wanted to. It was right out my front door. And not only snorkeling, but God fulfilled my childhood dream of going scuba diving. While I was there, God worked it out for me to go scuba diving several times for free. I went with the Jean-Michel Cousteau Resort, which he's the son of Jacques Cousteau. We We went scuba diving on some of the best coral reefs in the world. We had one of the best diving boats that the resort had, and I got to do that several times, scuba diving on these beautiful coral reefs, following sea turtles, seeing squid, sea stars. I think we may have even seen a small shark. Just incredible, like the things that I dreamed of, God just gave it to me for free. And I lived on this beautiful tropical island for several months. I got to go to, people paid for me to go to resorts. People paid for me to go scuba diving for free. They just offered it because they saw that I was doing mission work there and they wanted to do something nice for me, I guess. And I think God impressed them too, because God knew that was one of my childhood dreams. Also, other adventures I've been on doing mission work, night excursions through the jungle with blazing palm fronds. That was in the Fiji Islands. The jungles are very safe, so you don't have to worry about things attacking you at night. So we'd be going through the jungles with these blazing palm fronds, and you'd be holding this thing. It was really tall and on fire, and so you'd be walking through the jungle with this blazing torch in your hand, and when it would start to get low and start to be burning out, you'd find another palm tree with the lower branches would die and they'd kind of drape down, and so you'd light that on fire, you'd grab it and keep going with that one, and then when that one was burning out, you'd start another one on fire and grab that one and keep going. And so just, I mean, incredible, like going through these jungle trails with this big blazing palm frond in this tropical island. This was an island where just like 100 years ago or something, I'm not sure exactly if it was how long ago for sure, but it was like 100, 150 years, something like that. These people were headhunters. They ate the first missionaries that came there. The bay where I was doing mission work, the first people that came to that area, they got eaten by the headhunters. And more missionaries came, the headhunters became Christians. The entire island is Christian now, by profession at least. And they're just the nicest people you can imagine. It's a very safe place now, thanks to the first missionaries that came there. While I was there, like I was considered the chief from the mission station, because I was running the whole mission station. That's another story, how this farm kid ended up running an entire mission station with dozens of workers, and it was quite an experience. Not something I was prepared for ahead of time, but God helped me through it. But because I was the manager at the mission station, I was considered to be the chief of that area. And so when all the chiefs of all the villages would get together, they would invite me as one of the chiefs. And so I'd be sitting there in a circle in this hut with all the chiefs from all these different villages, and discussing political matters or whatever it was. I didn't understand a lot of what they were talking about because I couldn't understand the language. But just to be sitting there, like, here I am in this tropical island, sitting here with all these chiefs in this palm frond hut, is just really amazing. I had to negotiate with dangerous Fijian tribes for land that we'd purchased that they didn't want us to have. We were trying to build a hospital. And so I was having to do these negotiations with these people that were very dangerous. And in India, I was nearly captured by communist guerrillas. Just incredible stuff that, like, if you want adventure, work for God, because there's adventure. It's not all adventure and excitement. It's not all roses and flowers. There's a lot of hard things, but there's a lot of hard things in any vocation in life. And no matter what you do, you're going to run into hard problems. You're going to have issues in life. You're going to have lots of things to deal with. So there's a lot of responsibilities with working for God, but there's just so many benefits and blessings and even adventure, and He'll even fulfill your dreams possibly. So it's really incredible. Other things that have happened that it's just kind of mind-blowing. Like, I sit there and I wonder, how did this happen? Like, I've stayed in the homes of millionaires. I stayed in a senator's mansion on a private island in a beautiful lake. I stayed in a retired, I can't remember if he's CIA or FBI, but he was a retired service agent. I stayed in his mansion on top of a mountain at a ski resort. I actually took care of their home for a while they were gone. Just stuff like that. It's like, how did I end up here? How did me, this guy from a farm, end up in a millionaire's mansion? Just staying here. Just I can go kayaking around the lake. I can do whatever I want to here, and it's just really amazing. But the interesting thing is, like, even though like these are millionaires' mansions and everybody kind of wants to live in a millionaire's mansion, but they're just rustic huts compared to the mansions that we have in heaven. And I learned that the inhabitants of these places are not always happy. Even though they've got a lot of money, they're millionaires, they've got everything this world can offer them, but they're not, a lot of them aren't happy. Very few of them are happy. And the more they have, the less happy they are typically. And yeah, it's sad, but it's not something to covet. It's not something to wish for. Money is nice if you use it well, but I thoroughly enjoyed doing ministry with very little money, and I think I've enjoyed life a whole lot more than a lot of millionaires have. Some interesting things that God's done for us after we got married. Like, people want to go to do something special for their anniversary. Well, God can do that for you. Like, we didn't have a lot of money, so we had to wait. We had to let God work things out for us. So it's interesting that our first anniversary, God just worked it out. The timing was perfect. We got to have a month-long stay in a rustic cabin in the mountains of Montana, across the river from Glacier National Park. It's an awesome story how that all happened, but it was like, we didn't plan it. Nobody else planned it. It just happened to be right on our anniversary that we were asked to come take care of this place. And it was just a beautiful setting for our anniversary. Our second anniversary, we were in the middle of a ministry travels, and we happened to be at Carlsbad Caverns in New Mexico. That was one of the places that we were going to take virtual reality pictures to show to people and gather the evidences for creation, for the flood, for the earth being 6,000 years old. So that's what we were doing there, and we had our anniversary at Carlsbad Caverns. Our third anniversary was another month-long stay at the cabin in Montana, and we didn't plan these things. These were just, God just dropped them in our laps, and we got to do things for our anniversaries that a lot of people can't do. A lot of people, they can't take off a month and go stay in a cabin out in the beautiful wintry wonderland by Glacier National Park for an entire month. A lot of people can't travel thousands of miles to go to Carlsbad Caverns for their anniversary, but God just did these things for us. He planned it out for us. And so it's really neat how he doesn't just take care of our needs, but he gives us nice things too. And he can take care of, like, he provides for us. We live about a similar life to any other person. Like, we don't, during the first 6 months, or the first 6 years, of ministry, I was kind of just barely living on the edge, barely had enough to get by with. But after that, it's like God, he just provides whatever we need, and we have a great life. So don't be afraid. Don't be afraid that your life is going to be unhappy or that it's going to be boring. Don't be afraid that you'll starve. If God calls you to full-time ministry, he can take care of you. So I want to go through some principles of working for God, because a lot of people now, they have time. They've lost their jobs. Now they have time to work for God. And so people watching this may be considering doing that. They may be considering going into full-time ministry. And so if you lose your job, here's the first thing that you should do. You should pray. Christ told us to pray. He said, the harvest truly is great, but the laborers are few. Pray ye therefore the Lord of the harvest, that he would send forth laborers into his harvest. So first of all, pray that God will send laborers into his harvest fields. And then pray about if God wants you to be one of his employees. And you can consider him like an employer. Like, think of him like, if you're working for an earthly employer, you're going to trust them to provide for whatever they tell you you're supposed to do. So God's the same way. You can trust him to provide for you in whatever he sends you to do. He can be your employer. He can provide for you just like an earthly employer would. This is really encouraging to me. It says, the Lord himself will call men As of old, he called the humble fishermen, and will himself give them instruction regarding their field of labor and the methods they should follow. He will call men from the plow and from other occupations, to give the last note of warning to perishing souls. There are many ways in which to work for the Master, and the great teacher will open the understanding of these workers, enabling them to see wondrous things in his word. So that's really neat. God's going to be calling people, and my reason for giving this talk is because he may be calling you. He's going to be calling people from ordinary vocations, from their labor in the fields, the carpenters, the mechanics. He's going to be calling people like that to his work, and he's going to prepare you and equip you to give the last note of warning to the world. Here's another from Revere and Herald. We expect to see the Lord taking men from the plow and sending them out to proclaim the truth. We expect to see children bearing a message that their parents cannot bear. Let us all stand ready to respond to God's call of duty, whatever the sacrifice. And there will be sacrifices. It's not just going to be a bed of roses. There will be sacrifices to make. It's not always easy, but nothing in life is easy. So God's work, if you're working for God, he can take care of you when you get into hard places. There's a great work to be done in the proclamation of the gospel. God will call men from the plow and from the vineyard, and will send them forth into his service, even as Christ called fishermen from their daily occupation. As the first disciples, in obedience to the call of Christ, left their nets and followed him, so will men in humble walks of life go forth today with the message for this time. These devout servants of Christ will not seek the highest seat, but will follow Christ in the path of self-denial and sacrifice, and they will win souls to the Savior. There are thousands of souls willing to work for the Master who have not had the privilege of hearing the truth as some have heard it, but they have been faithful readers of the Word of God, and they will be blessed in their humble efforts to impart light to others. So that's really encouraging. There's thousands of souls out there that are willing to work for the Master, and he can equip them. Even if they don't have a lot of knowledge, they may not have all the light that we have, they may not know, they may not have been trained, but God can train them. He can give them the light that they need to go out and share with others. So the next thing is to volunteer. Pray like the prophet did, "Here am I, Lord, send me." And I was talking earlier about Peter walking on water, and I felt like God was calling me to do the same thing. Like he was calling me to walk on water. And like Peter, when Peter saw Christ walking on the water, he said, "Lord, if it be thou, bid me to come to thee on the water." So it was like Peter was asking, like, if it's really you, tell me to come to you. And so that's what I did too. Like I was asking, Lord, is it really possible to walk on water? And he said, yes, absolutely. Of course you can walk on the water. And so you can, if you feel God calling you, like he called Peter, come to me, then you can know that he'll help you to walk on water too. And so one of the principles that I've learned as I've been doing ministry like this is use what you have. When God called Moses, he said, "What's in your hand?" And all Moses had was his dead, dried up stick that he'd been walking around with probably for 40 years. He had this stick in his hand, and that was all he had. And he was supposed to go deliver his people from one of the mightiest nations in the world. Like this was one of the mightiest empires as far as their military and stuff. Moses had once been a commander of the Egyptian military. He knew what he was getting into. He also knew the Israelite people. And all he had in his hand was a stick. And God told him, go deliver your people from Egypt with that stick. So whatever you have in your hand, God usually says to you, take that and start using it. And you may not think it's much. Like Moses certainly didn't think his rod was sufficient to deliver the people from Egypt. But God says, use whatever you got, get started with that. And usually that's when God starts providing more. He provides whatever's needed when you start using what you've already got. And so start doing the little things. If you're faithful with doing the little things in the place that God's put you right now, then usually he'll open up doors, bigger and bigger doors of opportunity. And you'll find yourself doing stuff you never dreamed of doing. Like Now we're broadcasting on satellite television to the entire Eastern Hemisphere of the world. I never dreamed that that would happen. I just started with what I had. I just started with old computer equipment, started doing ministry on the internet, started doing whatever I could find to do, and it just started broadening and broadening, getting bigger and bigger, and more opportunities. And now we're traveling all across the United States. We have mission work going in India, and God just opens up these things as you move forward. And another principle that I learned was economizing. This was, I think, part of the reason why God gave me the first 6 years of training. I had to economize to the extreme in order to have enough money to get food, and just give me barely enough to get by with. And it was enough, but it just barely. And I couldn't splurge at all. I had to, I kind of jokingly say that I had to save up money to buy a toothbrush. That's almost the way it was. It wasn't quite that bad, but it was like I just barely had enough money to buy enough food to get by until he sent some more. And so I had to learn extreme economy. It's the principle of gather up the fragments that remain. When Christ fed the 5,000, he said, gather up the fragments that remain, that nothing be lost. So we have to learn economy first. We have to learn how to be very economical with what he gives us, be very faithful with it, be faithful to the minutest detail, and then he can supply you with more, because if he sees you're faithful, then heaven's got plenty of resources. He just needs people that can handle them faithfully. And another thing is, be an entrepreneur. Christ said the children of this world are in their generation wiser than the children of light. A lot of times I see like businessmen working in this earth's goods, and they're very intelligent. Like, they really exercise their intelligence. They come up with really ingenuitive ways of doing business, making money, finding niches of how to do their work and how to make it successful. They exercise a lot of intelligence in how to make their work a success. And I see God's people not nearly exercising that much intelligence of how to make their work a success. They just kind of go along, not really putting much effort into it, not putting much intelligence and ingenuity into it, not really exercising their minds to figure out better ways, more improved ways. They just keep doing the same thing over and over and not really seeing much results. It's the same thing people have been doing for the last 100 years, and maybe it's an old method that doesn't work well anymore or something. And they get discouraged because they say, well, nothing really is happening. And so they quit doing it. But it's because they're not using their intelligence to figure out ingenuitive ways of doing it. So we need to be spiritual entrepreneurs, figure out ingenuitive methods of reaching the people with God's message of truth. The people of this world, they're working for a reward, so they have an incentive to really exercise every power they've got to get that reward. But what about the children of light? We're supposed to be exercising just as carefully, if not more, because the reward we're seeking is much, much greater. It's an eternal reward. And so you can ask yourself the question, if you did worldly business the way you do ministry, would you be a success? And if you're not doing ministry in a way that you'd be successful, like if you were doing it in the same way, if you're doing a worldly business, if you wouldn't be successful in that, then you maybe need to re-examine how you're doing ministry. Another principle is to make every moment count. This is a description of Christ's life, and it says he weeded all vanity from life, and by his own example taught that every moment of time is fraught with eternal results, that it is to be cherished as a treasure and to be employed for holy purposes. So that's the way Christ did his work, and that's the way we need to do our work too, because he's our example. We need to cherish every moment, every resource we have, every dollar, every moment of time that we have, use it for some good. And as God sees that you're faithful using every little bit you have, he's going to pour forth more blessings on you, because he knows you'll use them faithfully. If you're not faithful in what he's already given you, then he's probably not going to pour out more blessings on you and provide lots more resources for you. So if you want to have resources, if you want to do the most work possible, have the most resources, the most funds to work with, you got to be faithful in every little thing that you do. Also having an intense purpose. There's another description about Christ's life. It says, filled with intense purpose, he carried out the design of his life that he himself should be the light of men. So just have that intense purpose like Christ had. Just a lot of businessmen in the world, they have such intensity. That's how they become millionaires. They're so intense about focusing on making money. And they're just doing it for something that's going to perish. But we're doing it for something that's going to be eternal. So we need to have an equally intense purpose in what we're doing. And the next principle is work like you mean it. Like the devil is working full time to destroy souls. You need to be working full time to save souls. You want to be a balanced person at the same time. You want to get enough sleep. You need time for your meals. You need to spend time with your family. Be balanced, but work. Don't waste any time. Don't sit in front of the television mindlessly watching things that aren't going to benefit you. Just put your effort into this work, and then you'll see God opening his blessings to you. Another principle is follow the business manual in every detail. So we've been given a business manual. Our employer has given us instructions how to work. When you're working for an employer, you a lot of times have instruction books. You have different books that give the principles of business that you're supposed to follow, give the rules of the company or whatever it is. And you're expected to conform your business practices to what you're given. And so it's the same. God's given us a business manual, and we're supposed to follow it in every detail. If you want God's blessing, you have to follow his instructions in every detail. Try to learn those instructions. You may not know it all to begin with. You may make mistakes. Don't fear mistakes, but work to the best of your ability. And everything you know, make sure you're following it. Make sure you're faithful to what he's told you to do if you want his blessings to be poured out upon you. And another thing is, there's going to be times when you suffer need. There's going to be times when you're in hard places. Paul talks about that. He was doing full-time ministry. He was doing it just going forward, just pressing forward as fast as he could doing ministry. So this is a description of how it was for him. He says, not that I speak in respect of want, for I have learned in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content. So that's a principle right there. Being content in whatever state you're in. He says, I know both how to be abased and I know how to abound. Everywhere and in all things I am instructed, both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. I can do all things through Christ which strengtheneth me. That's a verse that a lot of people quote. I can do all things through Christ who strengtheneth me. But a lot of times they don't go back to look at the context. The context is suffering need, being hungry, or abounding and having plenty. We can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. So if you're doing ministry, you're not just going to have a smooth road all the time. You're not just going to have everything provided for you all the time just the way you would like it. You're going to have the basic necessities pretty surely. God's going to provide for you and keep you alive. He'll provide for sure the basic necessities, but you may have times when you suffer need. You may have times when you're hungry. I haven't actually been hungry except for the one time I fasted, and that was kind of my own free will. I didn't absolutely have to do it at that time, but you may go hungry. There may be times when you don't have enough, but don't lose faith in God. That doesn't mean that he's abandoned you. It doesn't mean he's not providing for you anymore. So be prepared, be content if you're suffering need, and don't lose faith in God. Don't think that he's abandoned you, because even Paul suffered need. He was hungry, he was in prison, he was shipwrecked, he was in danger of robbers, and all these different things. So be prepared for suffering, be prepared for hunger and different things, and you can claim the promise like Paul did. I can do all things through Christ who strengtheneth me. That's the context of this promise. So the next principle is keep the resources moving. We know that a river that stops flowing will become stagnant. This is a principle that we're aware of, that if you don't keep the resources moving, you're going to become stagnant. God can't fill your basket if your basket is already full and you haven't emptied it from the last time you filled it. So if you hoard resources, you're probably not going to get more. You have to keep the resources moving. So if God gives you funds to work with, don't just sit on those funds and say, well, I don't I don't have much right now, so I'm going to just keep these funds until God gives me extra. He may not be planning to give you extra. He may be only planning to give you enough to meet the current need, and you have to use it before he's going to give you more. And so that's a principle that I've learned. A lot of times when I give away what I currently have, it might take me down to zero in my bank account, but if I give it away, pretty soon either an equal amount or a greater amount is going to come back in, and God provides for me as I send it out for his work. So keep the resources moving. That's one of the principles. Another principle that I've learned is praise God for what he's doing. This is a really important thing. If you're doing this kind of ministry, praise God for what he's doing. That's one of the ways that he works to keep providing for you. And as you're doing that, keep self-hidden. I'm talking about like praising God for what he's doing publicly, like telling people what God's doing for you, telling them how he's taking care of you and providing for you. But in the process of doing that, keep self-hidden. Don't talk about yourself. Don't exalt yourself, because it's easy to do that. That's one of the dangers for those that are doing full-time ministry, is self-exaltation. That can be a danger for people. So keep self-hidden. And as you praise God for what he's doing and what he's already done for you, that encourages you to have more faith. It encourages others to have more faith, because they see that, wow, God can really do miracles. He's providing for this person as they're doing ministry for him. So it encourages others to have more faith. And it seems to be the channel that God uses many, many times to send more blessings and more resources. A lot of times when I praise him for what he's doing, for providing for us to do ministry, then other people get inspired and they say, oh, I want to help with that ministry too. And so then they send funds. And so I found that usually our practice is that we don't typically tell people when we need money. We just do the work and then praise God for what he's done for us. And that's how God impresses people to send money. It seems to work even better that way than if we just went out and asked people for what we need. They get inspired a lot more when we praise God for what he's already done, tell the blessings, tell the miracles that he's doing. So this is that about how there's thousands of souls willing to work for the master. And I'm going to read some of the rest of that context. And it says, it goes on to say, it says, we already read the first part of this paragraph, so I'm going to skip to the last part here, where it says, let such ones keep a diary, and when the Lord gives them an interesting experience, let them write it down. So this is really important. Keep track of what God's done, and that's going to give you faith for future trials and future tests of your faith. So it says, let them write it down, as Samuel did when the armies of Israel won a victory over the Philistines. It continues on, he set up a monument of thanksgiving, of thankfulness, saying, hitherto hath the Lord helped us. 1 Samuel 7:12. Brethren, where are the monuments by which you keep in view the love and goodness of God? Strive to keep fresh in your minds the help that the Lord has given you in your efforts to help others. Let not your actions show one trace of selfishness. Every tear that the Lord has helped you to wipe from sorrowful eyes, every fear that has been expelled, every mercy shown, trace a record of that in your diary. As thy days, so shall thy strength be. Deuteronomy 33:25. Be willing to be little men, handling great subjects. Be willing to stay as a little man, handling great subjects. Be humble. And keep a diary. Keep a record of what God's done. I did that when I was going through the first 6 years of the ministry, and a lot of times really having just barely enough, and my faith was just tested, really, really stretched my faith. And in times like that, I kept a picture diary, so to speak. I had pictures on my computer of all the things God had done for me in the past, and I had those playing as a screensaver, and each picture would remind me of a story of how God had provided for me and how he had done a miracle to take care of me. And that really encouraged me when I was in hard places that he was going to continue to provide. And he always did. In answer to prayer, he would provide just at the last minute usually. But it was keeping that record in view, the monuments of what he had done in the past. That was what encouraged me to keep going, keep trusting him, and keep believing in him. when times were difficult. So the principles of stay humble and be diligent. God can only bless you if you're humble, diligent, and watchful. In the story of Gideon, when he was separating the men that were going to go to war from those who weren't going to go to war, he picked out those who were watchful. They were picking up the water to their mouth. They didn't bend over and put their head down and all the way to the water where they couldn't see the enemy if the enemy suddenly ambushed them. It was the watchful ones that would reach down and pick it up and put it to their mouth. So it was those who were watchful, those who were not afraid. He told all the fearful ones, you can go home. Go home. We don't need the fearful ones. God can make you, even if you are fearful, God can take away your fear if you ask him to. So don't think that you're going to get sent home just because you're fearful, because I was fearful a lot when I was first starting ministry. But God can take away your fear. He can help you to overcome fear. So be watchful, diligent, and humble. God only sent Gideon out with 300 people because it was important that the glory to go to God, not to the army. So another thing that was interesting, in doing ministry, I was wondering how COVID was going to affect the donations that were coming in. Would we still have enough money to support the mission work in India and everything? And it was really amazing how the donations actually increased during coronavirus. Even though people were losing their jobs and everything, people they were getting in tight places, but for some reason the donations increased during COVID. And we actually had more to work with, and we were able to do more work during COVID than before. So do you want to work for God? You can work for him part-time if you still have a job. You can do work for him part-time, or if you've lost your job, maybe it's time for you to consider working for God full-time. And God can provide for you. He can provide whatever you need. This is 1 Corinthians 9, 10, and 11. Now God, who provides seed for the sower and bread for food, will provide and multiply your supply of seed and will cause the harvest of your righteousness to grow. You will be enriched in every way, so that you may be generous on every occasion, which is producing through us thanksgiving to God. 1 Corinthians 9, 10, and 11. So that's a promise that God, he can supply you with seed for sowing. That's what you need for distributing to other people, your resources to spread the word. And he can provide bread for food for the sower. You're going to need bread too. So he can provide for you, and he can provide for the work that you need to do for the world. And he can multiply your supply of seed and the harvest that's going to come from it. So if you feel like God is calling you to walk on water, like I felt like he was calling me to walk on water, if you feel like he's calling you, you can answer, Lord, if it's you, bid me to come to you on the water. And Jesus said to him, come. But learn from Peter's mistakes. Peter made the mistake of taking his eyes off Jesus. Don't take your eyes off Jesus. Keep your eyes fixed on him. Don't look at the waves. Don't look at the troubles around you. Keep your eyes fixed on Christ. And don't become proud of walking on the water and say, oh, this is pretty cool. And then turn around and look back at your friends to see if they're watching. That's what Peter did, and he started sinking then. So if God calls you, the answer is, of course you can walk on water. So that's the end of that section of my talk. And I want to address another thing that a lot of people are concerned about right now. They want to get out of the cities. A lot of people are realizing they can't stay in the cities any longer. They got to get out. And a lot of people are looking for homes in the country. Right now, the country property market has just skyrocketed. People are coming out of the cities in droves, trying to find country homes to live in. These are not just Christian people. These are people of even secular people. They're trying to get out of the cities too and find homes in the country because everything's going crazy in the cities. So it's really hard to get out of the cities. Property is really expensive. A lot of families, they don't have the money to buy country property. And then we're coming into really hard times, and they don't want to get like thousands of dollars in debt, tens of thousands of dollars, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. This is a scary time to get that far in debt, but they need homes in the country. So how are they going to do it? It seems impossible. And I know it's a big challenge for a lot of people. So I wanted to share a couple stories of how God's provided for me. Country homes when I've needed them. So the first story is about after I came back from Puerto Rico. I'd been doing Puerto Rico mission work in Puerto Rico, and I was coming back to the United States after that was finished. Down in Puerto Rico, there was about 1,000 people per square mile on average. It's a very packed island. People are just everywhere. And I was reading the book Country Living, which has a lot of really good stuff in it. And I might kind of skip over these quotes. These are quotes these are from the book. It's talking about the importance of getting out of the cities into the country for the sake of your children, for the sake of yourself, for your safety. I'm going to skip over them for sake of time. You can look those up later or pause the video and read them if you'd like to. This was one that I read in particular, this part that's in bold and underlined here. And this was a kind of a key thing to me when I was looking for a place in the country. It says, many will have to labor earnestly to help open the way. I see a lot of people just kind of sitting where they're at least they have been before COVID. They're just kind of staying where they were at, not really doing much and just kind of placidly waiting for God to do something for them, to open the way for them. And I'm not sure that he's going to do that in a lot of cases. Sometimes you have to labor earnestly to help open the way. And that was the case kind of how it was for me. I'll tell about how that happened in a little bit here. So we were warned years ago to leave the cities. Our delay has given Satan opportunity to hedge up the way. It used to be a lot easier to get into the country. It used to be a lot easier to afford a country home. People could afford property back then. It was a lot cheaper. Now it's gotten so expensive, it's really hard to transition from city living to country living. There's a lot of challenges, a lot of things standing in the way that weren't in the way before. But our delay has made it really hard now. But the good news is that God can still work miracles. He's done that for me. So the story is, I was coming back from Puerto Rico, and I was reading the book Country Living, and so I looked up on the internet what's the least populated counties in the United States. And Catron County, New Mexico was one of the least populated. It had an average population of a half a person per square mile. And in Puerto Rico, there was 1,000 people per square mile on average. And so I came back from Puerto Rico. All I had was my car, a carload full of stuff, and $300 in my pocket. So that's about as hard as you can get to find getting out of a really populated place, trying to find a country home. I needed a house, I needed country property, and everything. I got to New Mexico, I found out everything was really expensive. And like for me, I didn't have a steady income, I didn't have an assured income, and I couldn't even find anything that was cheap enough to rent. It was super expensive to buy stuff, and it was really expensive even to rent stuff. So the question is, what do I do now? I had nowhere to turn but to God. I was out in New Mexico didn't know what I was going to do. How am I going to find a place to live in the country? For 2 weeks, nothing really happened. Like I was searching and searching and talking to people and looking for stuff, and it was just getting more and more hopeless. Nothing was happening. While I was there, I finally decided I'm not really accomplishing anything. I might as well kind of stop looking and just start doing ministry. Like I might as well do something while I'm here. So I turned to doing ministry and colporteuring. I started going around the neighborhood trying to sell books, doing colporteuring. And I started to meet people. I started making connections with people, reaching out to them, doing ministry to them. That's going to be an important point later. And I remembered, after about 2 weeks, I was sitting there and thinking and praying about it. And I remembered an experience that David Gates talked about that he had. And he was praying and praying. He bought I think it was a television network, probably for $1 million. He didn't have the money to pay for it. And he was praying. It was coming up to like the very last few days or something before he was going to lose it if he didn't pay for it. And he didn't have $1 million. He had hardly anything in his bank account. And he felt like God told him, you've been asking me long enough. Now you need to praise me for what I'm going to do. Even though you haven't seen anything happen yet, you need to praise me for what I'm going to do before you've seen it happen. And so he started just praising God for what he was going to do. And just like that, God provided $1 million to pay for the radio station. And it was just an incredible story. And so I remember that, and I thought, okay, I need to do that too. I've been asking God for like 2 weeks. Now I need to start thanking him and praising him for whatever he's going to do, even though I haven't seen anything yet. And by the end of the day, God had supplied everything I needed. It was incredible. I'd been looking for 2 weeks and found nothing. And then in one day, God provided everything I needed. A friend's friend's family had 200 acres of country property, just an hour north of where I was at. I mean, of all the random places I could choose in the country, here it was just an hour from where I was staying. 200 acres of land. Later I figured out it was probably worth about $1 million. And they told me I could just go out and live there for free. Nobody was using the land. I could just live there as long as I wanted to. No restrictions. I could just do whatever I wanted to. No rent, nothing. So then I needed a place to live. So I had the property now. I had the land to live on. Now I needed something to live in. And I'd been looking and looking. Even like I looked at junked vans. I thought maybe I could live in the shell of a van or something. But even that was too expensive. I couldn't afford it. I had $300 in my pocket. And people kept, as I was visiting different people, they kept telling me, you need to go talk to Frank. You need to go talk to Frank. So finally I went to talk to Frank, found out he had a little school bus that he and his wife had converted into an RV before she passed away. They'd used it for going to camp meetings. And so I went to talk to him, and in process of talking to him, I told him what I was doing ministry and everything. And then I asked him if he'd be interested in selling his bus. And he said, yeah, what do you want to pay for it? And I said, well, I only have about $100. And I knew that wasn't even enough for a bunch of scrap metal. And he said, yeah, I'll sell it to you for $100. So I got a bus for $100, which was really cheap compared to the prices for stuff out there. I'd looked at another bus I thought about buying, and it was like, I think over $1,000. So I got a school bus for $100. I was able to find a wood stove, 100-year-old wood stove for $75 because I was going to have to stay warm in the bus. It was wintertime was coming. One of the people I'd been doing outreach to, or one of the people I'd met in town, he was a Lutheran man, and he and his wife gave me a bed, and he also knew a person who had a trailer that could haul the bus because the bus didn't have a currently running engine. And so he had a trailer that could haul the bus, so he was able to go get that and haul the bus for me. So he drove this bus an hour for me. Another couple that I had met while I was colporteuring, they were very anti-Adventist when I first met them, and by the end of the time that I'd been visiting with them, they became very interested, and they found out that Adventists could actually be Christians too. And they were very impressed with that I was actually a real converted, godly Christian person. And so it totally turned around their opinion, and they sold wood. That was their business, and they gave me $100 worth of wood because I was going to need wood in my wood stove. And so I went the next day after taking the bus there. I went to, actually maybe I may have gotten the bus. I may have gone the day before I took the bus up there. So I went to buy food at Albuquerque, New Mexico, which was like over 2 hours away. I think it might have been. It was about 160 miles away from where I was at. I needed to buy food because I was running out of food. I needed to get like supplies. I needed to get an axe, a splitting maul, water jugs, food cooler. That was more important. So I had to get that first, and whatever I had left I could use for food maybe. And at this point I had $125 left of the $300 I came to New Mexico with. And so I was at Walmart. I had collected all my supplies for like the camping stuff that I needed in my cart, water jugs and cooler and all this different stuff. And I needed to get some food, but I was almost out of money, or I was going to be out of money once I bought it. And I didn't know how I was going to accomplish this exactly, but I knew God would take care of it. And I came around one of the aisles in Walmart, and here was two men that I had met back at one of the churches back where I had been staying at. I'd met these two men at church before. Here they were like 2.5 hours away from where they lived, and I was 2.5 hours away. We both met in the aisle at Walmart. And one of the men, he said to me, "Hey, Shawn, I've been wanting to talk to you. When my wife and I got married, we both had a supply of camping equipment. Now we have too much, and we wanted to give you some of it." And he started listing off the stuff that they had to give me. It was like water bottles, cooler, axe, splitting maul, all the things, the exact things that I had come to Walmart to buy and that I had filled my cart with. He had those things to give me. So I went back through Walmart and I put all this stuff back on the shelf. and I was able to spend my last little bit of money buying a supply of food. So by the end of the day, I had everything I needed for $300. I had everything I needed to do country living, and it was kind of primitive, but it worked. So it ended up being like one of the worst winters they'd had for 30 years. And I arrived just before winter started. That's about the worst time to try to set up yourself for country living. But I had everything I needed. I lived in the school bus for 6 months, I think, through most of the winter. And it was awesome. I loved it. It was hard work. It was hard work living in the country. I had to split wood every day. I had to haul water because we didn't have running water. I ran the car to make electricity to run my computer to do ministry. And I had to drive like 45 minutes or a half hour to the church to use Wi-Fi to upload stuff to the internet that I had prepared. So it was difficult, but it was working. I could do it. God provided for me to live on this 200 acres of land way out in the middle of nowhere. Here's a picture of it. You can see the little itty bitty bus under the arrow there. Just beautiful, wide open countryside. The elk would be walking across. I could see herds of elk walking by. I had a 360-degree view out the windows because there was windows all around the bus. The bus didn't have any insulation in it, but I stayed warm enough during the day. I had to cook on the stove, and so while I'd be cooking, it would heat up the bus so much I had to open all the windows, open the back door. So I'd be sitting there eating my food, looking out at the mountains, watching the snow falling outside my door, having my doors and windows wide open because it was that little wood stove kept me so warm. And God provided everything I needed while I was living there. He got me out. All I had was a little car, but he got me through the mud. People said, you're going to have to sell your car and get a truck because you can't exist with a little car like that. You're going to pop your tires on the sharp rocks. People with double-ply tires were popping their tires because there were so many sharp rocks. I never popped my tires. I never got stuck when I was living there. It was just incredible how God took care of me so many times. And after I'd been there for a while, then God provided for me to actually move into a real cabin with electricity, running water, a lot more convenient situation. I had electric heat, so I didn't have to chop wood anymore. So God kept providing one thing after another. And I was still living in the country in one of the least populated counties in the whole United States, and God provided everything I needed. He provided. The cabin that he gave me to live in later, that was free too. Some friends had it, and all the utilities were paid. I still needed to get my food and my gas for my car, and I had a free place to live. It was just really amazing. So this is God inhabits praises. In the Psalms, it talks about that. It says, "But thou art holy, O thou that inhabitest the praises of Israel." And he says, "Our fathers trusted in thee. They trusted, and thou didst deliver them." So I was trusting in God too, and God just delivered me, took care of me, and whatever I needed. And it was interesting to me that God used the people that I witnessed to provide what I needed. It was by doing ministry work. That's how he provided for me to be taken care of. And I want to say that I don't recommend people doing what I did. Like, I just went out there with nothing. I had no preparations. The book Country Living, it talks about how people should plan wisely. They should do things wisely, not just go out there with no preparations, no resources. So if you have the option, prepare, get your resources in order, have the money you need, do all that preparation. But for me, I couldn't do any of that. Like, I was doing ministry. I didn't have a supply of funds. I didn't have a way to, I was coming back from the mission field. I didn't have a way to plan ahead where I was going to live, get everything lined up ahead of time. So for me, it was kind of, I just had to do it that way. And I know a lot of people are going to be fleeing the cities. They're going to be in emergency situations. They can't really plan ahead of time. They can't prepare because maybe they've delayed too long. They didn't prepare while they could have, or maybe they didn't have an opportunity to before. And so they're in an emergency situation, and God can take care of you even in emergency situations. You don't have to be afraid in those kind of situations. So you may need to do like I did in emergency. Typically, that's not the way you should do it. You should plan ahead, be wise, do things in a wise way. Don't just go out on a limb like I did, but that's what I had to do in that situation. So I want to share another experience. This has happened more recently. I was talking about the cabin that we built, and at a certain point we had to leave that cabin, and we didn't know where we were going to go. So we were just we were packing up to go, and we didn't even know where we were going yet. And just at the time when we had to make a decision, had to go somewhere, God provided for us. He had this lady contact us from Arkansas, and so we went down there. We had a beautiful home to live in. It was a nice, to leave in the winter and go south, that's what everybody wants to do. It was a beautiful winter down there. We had a whole house all for ourselves. There's nobody else living there for the first amount of time that we were there. And it was just a beautiful situation, just a perfect provision for us. We could do ministry. We had lots of room to do our ministry work. And then when we needed to leave there, the time had come that we needed to go somewhere else. And we didn't know what we were going to do, how we were going to accomplish that, because we didn't have a place to go. And just at that time, God provided us with an RV. Our friends gave us this RV, totally free, and it was really nice, worked well, just the perfect situation for us. And so we lived in that for the first summer, and then when winter came, we needed something that was better for winter, because you can't live in an RV very well up north. And God provided for us a place to live. It was in town, but it was a really small, little, quiet town, and it worked really well for us for that winter. We had a whole house to ourselves. All the utilities were paid. All we had to do was watch over it, just be there and take care of it. And we could have all this room to do our ministry work, lots of room to set up a ministry base that we could travel if we needed to and come back. And it was just awesome. But after that, we needed to move. After those people came back, we needed to move somewhere else, and we didn't know, again, where are we going to go to? So we needed a ministry base, and we ended up moving back into the RV for the summer, but we realized that we need more room. We need room to store our ministry equipment. We need room to store all these books that we're going to be giving away at the fairs and stuff. So we need room for this stuff. And so we were praying about this, how are we going to get a ministry base? We need a kind of more permanent situation, because for our ministry that we're doing, we need something that's a little more permanent than the RV. And so we were praying about, well, does God want us to buy something? So we started looking around. We were looking at cheap houses in town. There's these little itty bitty towns that are kind of dwindling away, and the houses are cheap because nobody really wants them. So we thought maybe we could afford one of these houses in town. We didn't really want to live in town, but we thought that's maybe what we'd have to do. But just nothing was coming together. Nothing seemed right. Nothing was falling into place. It was just like God wasn't opening the way. And so we were looking at some old junky places, and there was one right next to us where we were living, and it was a really old junky place. And I was thinking, well, maybe we got to settle for that, fix it up. I didn't realize at the time how much work that would be. I had done some of that kind of work, but I didn't realize at the time how long it would take to fix up something like that. And as I was thinking about that, and as I was praying about this building next to us, I felt like God, it was like as the Holy Spirit said to me, I've got something better for you than that. Don't go that way. Yeah, I've got something better for you. So we just kind of quit looking, because we had ministry work to do. We had events to go to. And so we just kind of gave up the plan of trying to find a home to buy as a ministry base. And we just went to our next event. And while we were at this event, right after we'd finished, I was sitting there, and I was looking at pictures on the phone of this one farm that we had been to. As we were traveling, looking at different places, we had visited this farm. It was a beautiful farm, just it was very secluded. It was the perfect place for us. And the people were asking a low price for it, but it was still way more than we could afford. And we didn't want to take out a mortgage, really. And that would be a big step when we're just doing ministry. And so it wasn't really feasible for us, but I was looking at the pictures on my phone, and I prayed, and I said, Lord, will you please give us this farm if it's your will? And it wasn't that serious of a prayer, because I didn't think it would actually happen, I guess. But I prayed it. I prayed, Lord, can you please give us this place? It looks so perfect. I just love it. And the very next day, a friend who I hadn't talked to for quite a while, he contacted me and he said, hey, my wife and I have been saving up this fund of money for 8 years. We're concerned about the economy. We want this money to be used for ministry work. And that's what we were saving it up for. But we're concerned about the economy and we don't want to lose it all. So we would like to send it to you. We feel bad because we have a place to live and you guys don't have a place to live. And so the very next day, after I'd asked God for this farm, these friends offered to send us all this money, and it was almost exactly what we needed. The seller agreed to a price that was almost exactly what our friends had sent us. And the price that they sold it to us for was a fourth of its assessed value. Like, property has gone up so much now, like we got it for a fourth of its real value. And God just provided all the money we needed to buy it. Like, even at the fourth of its value, it was still way more than we could afford. But God provided. He just dropped it in our laps the day after I asked him for it. And so we got this farm. We paid for it in cash. It's debt-free, no mortgage. It's the perfect place for us. It's beautiful. It's out in the country. Just wide open, beautiful countryside. There's like one farm we can see at night. Like, when you look out, there's one farm that we can see the lights from where somebody lives. There's more farms like hidden back in other directions. It's not like we're not that, like, on the sides, two sides of us, we have hills on two sides of us, and we know that there's people out there, but we can't see them. They're like so far away we can't see them. We can look out to the east and west for like 15 miles all the way to the horizon on both sides, and there's like one farm light. It's just like so beautiful, so secluded, just a wonderful, beautiful place. These are some pictures of the sunsets, sunrises. It's just, we just love it. That's where we're at right now. That's where I'm recording this right now. Just such a beautiful place. And we've been living here for the whole summer now. And it's just so amazing to have this 4-bedroom home. Like, just God just gave it to us. And we have plenty of room for storing our materials. We have plenty of room for setting up our video studio, setting up our equipment, setting up our places to work on our ministry projects. And it's pretty neat too. Not only did he give us a country home, but it has a wood cook stove in the basement from way back, the previous owners, several generations back. This cook stove is probably 70, 80, maybe 100 years old. I don't know. But it's a wood cook stove in the basement. We have another a regular wood stove, small one that we can put in if we want to. A friend gave us an almost brand new, really nice high wattage generator. The neighbor, right before we had purchased the place, the neighbor installed a solar pump on the well because he uses one of the wells. There's 2 wells that we have on the place. He uses one of them for watering his cattle. And so before we had bought it, he had installed a solar pump to pump the water out of the well. So we have our own well for our house, but if we need water, if the electricity goes out or something, there's a solar pump out there at the other well. So it's just like God provides all these different things. We've just seen so many miracles, how God's provided for us over the years. And of all the things that he's done, this is probably the biggest financial miracle. We've had other miracles that were really big in other ways, but as far as like just a lump sum of money all at once, a financial miracle, this is probably the biggest that we've ever had. And so God's provided us, it seems like, a more permanent home in the country now, a home base that we can come back to as we're traveling, doing ministry. We have a place we can come back to now. And this is a neat quote. "The time has come when, as God opens the way, families should move out of the cities." This is from that book, Country Living, that I was telling you about. "The children should be taken into the country. The parents should get as suitable a place as their means will allow. And though the dwelling may be small, yet there should be land in connection with it that may be cultivated. Fathers and mothers who possess a piece of land and a comfortable home are kings and queens." That's really neat. So if you need a country home, I know a lot of people are needing country homes right now. They're trying to figure out how to make that happen. These are a number of experiences that we've had where God provided us one home after another for each different situation that we had. And he can do it. He can do miracles. It's always going to be something different. God works in different ways. It's different for each person. You're not going to have the same miracle happen that we had, probably. But that shows God's power. He's got a lot of ways to do it, not just one or two. And there's a lot of you have read this from Ministry of Healing. Our Father has 1,000 ways to provide for us of which we know nothing. Those who accept the one principle of making the service of God supreme will find perplexities vanish and a plain path before their feet. So that's just such a beautiful quote. And so it says he has 1,000 ways to provide for us of which we know nothing. So if we can think of, let's say we can think of 5 ways that he could provide for us, that means he's got 5,000 ways that we don't know about. Or you could think of it that way. If for every one way that we know of, he has 1,000 ways that we don't know about. So God can take care of you, whether you're working full-time for him or just part-time for him. Everybody is working for God, whether it's full-time or part-time. Whatever time you have, you should be spending part of it for God. But he can provide for your needs, whether you're working full-time or even part-time for him. There was times when I couldn't work full-time for him, and he provided for me even while I couldn't work full-time for him. So he can provide whatever you need. He can provide for you a country home if you need it, but you have to trust him. You have to live by what he tells you to do. You have to follow the owner's manual, the Bible. You have to follow the business plan he's given you for doing your Father's business. And he can take care of you while you're doing that. So I hope these testimonies have been an encouragement to you. I hope it's been a blessing. And here's our email address and our website if you have any questions. So I pray that God will bless you as you consider working for him, and as we're going forward into the times ahead, that you're encouraged that he can take care of you and provide for you.